On the first time it was struck, they retaliated.
With conversations right here, and right about now we will be having a conversation around the situation and the game plan for 2027. So it is the fight for DP slot. Just to lay the matter before we start the conversation. So ODM party has said that wanataka power. And part of the power that they want is the position of DP, and that is non-negotiable, right? But you talk about the party that is UDA, which is the ruling party as we speak at the moment, and it is saying that the position of DP belongs to them. So you look at Mount Kenya mostly, and Professor Kiptoo, Deputy President, says that position is his to maintain. You look at Kirinyaga Governor Waruguru Ann says that she's as well there and she's fit for that seat, and she will fight it out with Deputy President Kiptoo Kindiki for that seat. And you look at the seat of Deputy President, and it seems as if it is another battleground for whoever will form the party, will form government next year, because everybody wants it, but numbers as well have to be considered. Yeah. To have this conversation is Joshua Kiptoo, who's an advocate of the High Court. Arnold Maliba is a political analyst. He will be joining us a little bit later. Welcome to the show, Kenya's biggest conversation. That is the hot seat.
Thank you.
About game plan for 2027 and fight for the DP slot. But before we get to that, I just want to take you to the Democratic Republic of Congo, a beautiful country, right? And it is a country that has Africa's largest internally displaced population. We're talking about over 5.8 million internally displaced and over 1 million refugees in nearby countries. Yeah, largely due to ongoing regional conflict, particularly in the eastern part of the country. Now, the country contains vast biodiversity, including 3 of the world's 4 great apes, so numerous birds and plant species, and the oldest national park in Africa, which is the Virunga National Park. Country that is rich in resources. Sadly enough, we see where it is today, and one asks the question, motherland, continent, Africa, African Union, East Africa Community, what are you doing in ensuring that this great country continues to grow? But the proverb that we get from this country, Joshua, yes, the lizard had the tree in mind before challenging the dog in a fight. The lizard had the tree in mind before challenging the dog to a fight. How would you interpret it?
I'll interpret it as a case of you look at a safeguard mechanism. If left on an open field, a fight between a lizard and a dog definitely means it's a one-sided fight. But in seeing a tree, the lizard gets some comfort that I can cause some little blow to the dog and quickly jump into the tree. Of course, that may have pitfalls. How about if you slide from the tree? Yeah. So it's a case of before you pick a fight, and if you're on the weaker side, ensure you have a guarantee. What is your exit plan? If you don't have an exit plan,
stay away.
That's a problem.
Okay. Yeah. Napenda. Iko sawa. So when it comes, if everything is equal, kwa grau peleke pale Kasarani, ndugu yangu utalimwa. You know, interesting. But let's talk about the matter at hand. Joshua. You know, we find ourselves in a very interesting position as a country where 2027 politics are there. One would say campaigns should not happen right now because based off the rules of the game, campaigns should not happen. But everyone now wants to be the DP. You know, you look at ODM, tunataka nini? Power. Weka, mawe. DP, ni yetu. We have the numbers, you know. We are in this broad-based arrangement based off our numbers, and our merger with the president has enabled him to work. Because many say after Rigathi Gachagua left and he left with his luminaries, if ODM as well had left, it would be very difficult for the president to work. So when you talk about the DP's position, how critical is it and how will it change politics in 2027?
So thank you very much. I think we are now getting into that season where political jostling and gerrymandering becomes the order of the day. And this is the season where politicians have to bring their A game. So what you have is basically more or less like a beaten path where our politics has generally cascaded into coalition type of politics. If you see back since 2002, that trajectory has been very consistent. So we've crystallized our politics into hardened coalition politics, whereby no single candidate, whether the incumbent or the opposition, can fathom to go it alone or individually or within more or less like a unilateral formation. So when you talk about coalition politics, then that means jostling, negotiating, bargaining becomes the core, becomes the everyday aspect of this type of politics. So that you have UDA being the ruling coalition, but UDA was within a Greater Kenya Kwanza Alliance in 2022. And definitely the situation is not as it was in 2022. There have been fallouts, there have been removal. The impeachment of the former deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua, definitely chipped away quite a number of the elected leaders, not quite, but a few, or maybe say a third of the elected leaders are outrightly, yes, elected under UDA, but completely against the government. The majority of them are still there, but you can see they are also struggling to try keep their pace within the Mount Kenya region. So definitely that then called for the UDA or the Kenya Kwanza Alliance to look for other willing partners. Broad-based was basically a stopgap measure, but it seems the stopgap measure is now trending towards being a mainstay, because as at the time the broad-based regime or the coalition was being put in place, it was more or less to stabilize the regime. And the stabilization was basically that was the architecture set around by Raila Odinga. And in his absence, then you have the coalition having no other option but to crystallize into a hard coalition going into 2027 election. The president, of course, in his wisdom, calculates that he just needs first to consolidate whatever he has and then look out for new partners. And the moment you have that arrangement, then it now brings into focus this kind of fights that we have, like the ODM, the remnant of the ODM, because it's not the whole ODM. The remnant of the greater Orange family is taking a claim. To be honest, I think it's more of posturing. I don't think they have the muscle to demand and dictate. If it was the ODM that had both Linda Brown and Linda Mwananchi coalesce together, yes, that would be a really big
Am I hearing you telling us this morning that the ODM that does exist today, so we have ODM that went through the NDC and everything, and we have the other ODM, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about the Jeremy, James Orengo, you talk about Babu and Sifuna, right?
Yes.
So is it a position where now the ODM that is in broad-based fully, mzima, right, is an ODM that does not have grounds, does not have what it takes to demand for the DP post?
They have what it takes to negotiate and bargain, but it is a bit far-fetched to imagine that they can demand. The word is demand. Look at the two demands they are putting on the table to the UDA side of the broad-based coalition. They are asking for the deputy presidency and they are asking for zoning. They can talk about zoning. UDA can choose out of goodwill, out of the desire to maintain good neighborliness and family relations, just like in a polygamous relationship. It would mean you seed something. And the kind of seeding they can be able to do, if you ask me, would be the seeding where they let go of the issue of having candidates within the ODM stronghold. But at the same time, I don't think the deputy presidency position is on offer. My 2 cents with it is that the biggest challenge you are facing is that coalition politics are delicate in this case. The president has not given up on Mount Kenya. The president is scrapping it to the bitter end to be able to maintain a vote block that gave him 43% of his total votes in 2022. He may not, and I don't think he's wise enough to know that the situation may not be as it was, because whatever the fight being brought to his doorstep by the former president Uhuru Kenyatta, as well as the former deputy president, in the fight for the heart and soul of Mount Kenya, would mean it is not as it was. It was no longer a solid block as it was in 22. But whatever the case, he's keen to ensure that he does not lose that constituency by whatever means. But so how do you maintain that? You don't tinker by removing the deputy presidency.
Is the president at this point the lizard in an open field?
Not
especially
really.
in Mount Kenya. Why do I say that? Because you look at what is happening in Mount Kenya today, and one would say the president. So I would pose a question, part one and part two. Is the president in an open field? Is he the lizard? Why? Because you look at Mount Kenya, and many would say that is a lost cause. You know, he's wasting his time in Mount Kenya. That's number one. Number two, you look at if the president today sees, or has he seen as a strategist, that Mount Kenya is gone, therefore he's looking away, that perhaps I need to consolidate ODM, the western part of the country, and Nyanza, and the cost for him to be president in 2027.
So one thing, is not per se a lizard. I would rather say a hawk. Because its strength is in the tree, yes, but it is only still little in the field. Why do I say so? I don't think Mount Kenya is a complete write-off. Because if you say a lost cause, it will be a write-off. It's just it's like an insurance car, like a vehicle that has crashed and the insurance gives you a write-off and compensates you fully. That's not the case. Why do I say so? If you look at the contest they have had within Mount Kenya, within the by-election, tells you it's not a write-off. It is a fight. Yes, that's why I'm saying he will not consolidate the 85% that he got in 22. But I don't think it's a lost cause. If UDA has succeeded to win all the by-elections within Mount Kenya, that tells you something. And that is enough motivation to keep the UDA ruling party, to give it a motivation to fight. Now, that is number one. And where was the fight? Mostly in the Mount Kenya East, where Kithure Kindiki comes from. For me, that was a plus. I honestly think that was a referendum on Kithure Kindiki's capacity and ability to mobilize. And if he succeeded to deliver the wards as well as the constituency in the area north, it was more or less like an audition of some sort that don't write me off yet. I think I can be a key cog in the will of the president to get something out of Mount Kenya. But also, you are very right. There's also the delicate balance of the ODM regions. And there's a problem with the ODM regions. Raila Odinga had the ability and capacity to give you a wholesome. It's like sitting on the table waiting for the food to be served. So you would have certainty. I want a 3-course meal, 1, 2, 3, and you'll be delivered. So Raila then had ability to deliver ODM as a wholesome product. That is not the case. So the president now is forced to venture out and approach the regions independent of each other. How he will approach the Western region, he may even have a different approach for the counties within a region. So that if he goes to Western, he'll split Western into 3. You have Bungoma, which is tied together with Trans Nzoia. He has to do Vihiga together in a way with Kakamega. And then you have Busia, because Busia is always considered to be a strong orange space. But again, his approach would have to be, so Western divided into 3, have a direct show-in. If you go to Luo Nyanza, again, you split Luo Nyanza from Kisii. How he will approach Kisii, independent of Luo Nyanza, has to come to play. So that you see a president now doing more than what he was to do if Raila Odinga was present. So that then brings why you see the ODM then has ability. The remnant of the ODM and under the youth leader now, the party leader, Oburu, having this ability to say, this is what we want. So the work of the Oburu-led ODM, which is basically the mainstream ODM, their biggest task at hand is to try maintain some semblance of existence of the Orange family as it were. For example, their stronghold was always Western, Nyanza, Coast, and the pastoralist areas, especially if you talk about the mass speakers. Their job will always be to front one, more or less like a one formation. I feel they're struggling to do that, and that's why they would posture and say, if you deliver for us the deputy presidency, we are able to consolidate this. Not a case, because I think it is purely dependent on the president's outreach rather than. But for ODM, it's a plus, because in that fight, at least they can get something. They can be able to get zoning within Luo Nyanza, and they can get a few more slots than what they have now, but not the deputy president. That's what I think.
You know, Mheshimiwa, I call you Mheshimiwa because you've been a speaker of a county assembly, right? And if you look at what you're talking about, is really the hard political strategy. But if you were to look at this from a constitutional legal perspective, the DP position is like almost nothing. You are an assistant. You basically sit and wait to be sent somewhere, given responsibilities, etc. Why do you think it is exerting this enormous interest from political parties, particularly big political parties like ODM? Because you are a DP, you are all by constitution. The legal responsibility of a DP really in the context of Kenya is that you are an assistant to the president.
Yeah.
For President William Ruto, we have not seen the DP really exercising that assistance role because he's a present president. He's a president who is here, he is strategizing, he is planning, he is executing.
He's running the show.
He's basically the man standing at the top of almost everything. Why would it be so exciting? Why is a DP slot, constitutionally, legally speaking, an exciting role for these politicians?
That's a good question. I'll split the answer into two. Constitutionally and legally speaking, the deputy president position is still strong. Because one, it has a budget of its own. It has a bureaucracy. Because I'm doing a comparative analysis before 2010 and now. You have a deputy president office that is fully funded. Number two, it has significant roles that maybe you ignore. You've said very well, being a speaker, I'll remind you, the deputy president is the chair of IBEC.
IBEC, yes.
That is the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic, which then plays a critical role in determining the division of revenue. He becomes the foremost person who sits at the table where there's a division of revenue between the counties and the national government. So constitutionally and legally speaking, and by virtue they have their budget. One of the fights they had with the deputy or whatever with the president, remember it was a question of budget allocations in terms of how much he demanded in form of even confidential vote. So there is a critical office legally and constitutionally speaking with responsibilities and power. That's a fact. However, let's now switch it to politically. Politically, the first deputy presidency we ever experienced was the one for William Ruto. The only challenge that if that is the scorecard to refer to, I don't think any other president will be comfortable. Because the deputy president in the name of the current president, William Ruto, was a very powerful deputy president, politically speaking. Because he came into their coalition in 2012 with half the votes that contributed to the win of Jubilee. So in both election cycle of 22 and 27, he was a 45-50% contributor. In fact, some analysts would say, if you look at the political organization of Jubilee, you will credit William Ruto to be the engine behind it, because he's a political animal that throws everything at the wall until it works. If you remember in 2017, when Jubilee nominations read into a headwind, he was the guy who showed up at the Jubilee headquarters, cancelled the elections, most of them, reran it, and in a 24-hour cycle, turn it around and won it. You'd understand the discomfort the president then had, having a deputy president who came with a sense of entitlement and a vote block to boot. That then set the pace for his presidency, that he would not have a similar deputy president. And Rigathi Gachagua wanted to repeat the same template. So politically speaking, it is mostly personality based, and I don't think politically speaking you'd have a deputy president who sits with a 50% mindset. So I feel the fallout, because I just want to finish this point. The fallout between the president and Rigathi stemmed out of the fact that Rigathi wanted to recreate what William Ruto had. Yet William Ruto came with a 50% vote block, which it was a coalition signed. Rigathi was appointed by the president as a nominee within his UDA. It was not a coalition.
That they
but then Rigathi would say, no, they didn't sign any agreement. It is only that Rigathi now would say, if I'm to count the number of votes that came from my region, so he wanted to own, but the president said, I got that vote directly, not with you. It's only that you are part of a package. So you have then Kithure Kindiki suffering the problem of how does he balance? How does he not become such a rabble-rouser like Rigathi, but still becomes politically potent? I think he's doing it quite well by virtue. He's already staked out his place, whereby if you see the way he's having delegations coming to Karen and his outreach in Mount Kenya, specifically Mount Kenya, where the president has somehow let him be. And then you find him being this amiable person, not keen to ruffle feather with the boss, but at the same time having visibility. So going forward, our deputy president will always struggle with this careful balance.
Joshua, what I hear you, because the comparison you've just made, leads me to ask the question then that President William Ruto, then as deputy president, was a rabble rouser. He was equal to the task and made it very difficult for the president to overlook him,
Absolutely.
because he was a strong machine. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And you come to 2022 and President William Ruto takes Rigathi Gachagua, someone who as well matched his push, one would say, that would sit at the table as equals, But the president, knowing very well what he did in the previous administration, there was no way he was going to have Rigathi Gachagua there, because he knew, like, this man could change things in the long run. Therefore, the president today, would I be right to say that, or would I be wrong if I say that the president therefore wants a weakling as a deputy president, someone he can control, someone who cannot challenge him on things that are happening, and that the deputy president, Kithure Kindiki, today is seen as a weakling who cannot stand up to the president and call him out, because the president today as deputy president would stand against his boss and say, a guy, I can run the show. So is it a question of the deputy president looking at a weak link, and that even as we go to 2027, it is the same strategy that he will be applying?
If you are to use your analogy, then in 2022, Rigathi Gachagua was a weak link. If you are to use that. If it was a case of trying to look for a weak link, then Rigathi was a weak link. Why? He was a first-time MP.
No, but
number two, because I just want to show you the difference.
Let me correct that.
Because Rigathi then and Rigathi now are two different.
Let me correct that.
Yeah.
Rigathi Gachagua, as even in the negotiations, because we know in the voting within the party UDA on who won, that was Kithure Kindiki. But William Ruto settled for Rigathi Gachagua because of the push, because of who he was at the political space at the time. So he was not a weakling. The president knew he needed Rigathi Gachagua to win the Mount Kenya vote. So therefore, even the getting rid of Rigathi Gachagua was because he knew the cog that Rigathi was to his government, and getting rid of him, there was no way he was going to replace Rigathi Gachagua with another Rigathi Gachagua. He needed someone that he could talk down to and who would not stand up to him.
My answer to that is quite simple. Politics is very dynamic and very progressive. The political situation then and now significantly changed, and I'll have a reason why. Let's start with why Rigathi Gachagua was picked. Rigathi Gachagua was picked because in president's calculation, Azimio had already picked on Martha Karua. Because if you talk about Mount Kenya, you have mainstream Mount Kenya being Kikuyu. And then the Mount Kenya East, which is then made of the Meru, Tharaka-Nithi, Embu, as a top-up cousins to the main. So the vote block here you're referring to is the Kikuyu, then the cousin. Though it's a constituency that has always voted single-handedly as a block, except maybe 92 when Matiba and Kibaki split the vote. And if you remember the split of 92, Kibaki swept Mount Kenya East. Matiba swept the rank and file Kikuyu constituencies, which is from Kiambu all the way to Kirinyaga. You come to 97, and to 97 Kibaki consolidated. In 202 they split. Uhuru kind of did well in Kiambu, which is his backyard. But since then, 207 coming forward, they've always voted as a block. So I think the calculation then was, if Azimio has a mainstream Kikuyu as a number 2 in form of Martha Karua, then we must have a card against that. And that is why you could see the president be laboring the rank and file MPs from Mount Kenya that, yes, I know you would be comfortable with Kithure Kindiki. If you are to use the circumstances then, Kithure Kindiki was senior to Rigathi. This is a person who had come in as a majority leader in the first term of Jubilee government, and then became a deputy speaker in 2017. So if by all means, between 2012 and 2022, Kindiki was a senior most leader. And that's why it was easy for the Mount Kenya MPs, majority of them, to insist that let me just finish, if you are to have a running mate, then it should be Kithure Kindiki. But in his wisdom, which is basically political calculation, it comes to what we are doing now. Why do you think there's that jostling for this DP position? Have you curiously mentioned that Waiguru is equally making a case for it? Because you may want to use the same card and say if Rigathi was picked then. However, now coming to the point, so the choice of Rigathi then was not for a weakling, but was for the numbers. Now, this is the danger. William Ruto felt that he's picked a person that would then fit the numbers, but remain an appointee, not a negotiated position. That's why Rigathi was humble and all that. The only challenge, as you say, his style of politics is rabarausing, which possibly with the wisdom of the president then is like, no problem. I know he's a rabarouser, but this is my guy. I'll sort him out. I'll handle him nicely, right? And if you could see the first 1 year, there wasn't much back and forth. But I think it got into the head of Rigathi that, look, I've not been appointed as a friend. I've been appointed by right. And he said, if William Ruto ran a 10-year deputy presidency with the might, then I'll have to replicate the same. And that's when I'm sure the president said, wait a minute. This guy was not the main choice of the MPs. This was my guy. Yeah. How comes now he switched and now become entitled? And you can actually see the political fallout. So that even I'm sure within the UDA coalition, do you know how long it took for people to make sense of this fight? People are in denial. People didn't know how serious this fight was. That as at the time the impeachment thing was coming, did you remember by August 2024, people are in denial that it's not going down? Until that it happened. And the only challenge is, as you say, just to agree with you, politics is dynamics. The Rigathi of 22 is not of 27. Now he's become a thorn in the flesh. He's become someone bigger than he was in 22. There was an expectation that he would fade out. He's refused to fade out. He's no longer the lizard, because I would have put him to be the lizard of 22. Now he's no longer the lizard. He's actually out there in the field, ready to fight it out. And look, why do you think Rigathi is that nasty and all that? Because he has another card, politically speaking, that is a bit working in his favor. He is not negotiating from a point of opposition. As it stands, if you are to operate on the impeachment proceedings, unless the court nullifies, then he has no ability to hold any position, which makes him a potent force, because he's the type to be a troublemaker, rabble-rouser, and can negotiate out a team without necessarily demanding him to be in the ticket. When other places people are saying, what's my in there as a particular position, he has nothing to negotiate for. For him, it will be negotiated about clout. So as I say, the deputy presidency going forward, just to agree with you, the deputy presidency going forward now will call for a more rethink. Any presidential candidate will not just be picking someone for the sake of picking. Of course, the votes will count, but at the same time, compatibility will be a key. Why I feel so far so good, Kithure Kindiki has passed the test of that compatibility. He's not weak and he's not too strong politically. He is working nicely under. If Rigiji would have just sat through post 27, I think it would have been worse for the president, because in the second term, it would have been a serious problem to have Rigathi.
I know Kevin has a question.
I have a follow-up question on devolution, and especially because of the role of the deputy president. If you are to look at the people who are angling and some of the names that are being proposed out there, and you look at state of devolution, and especially because we have also agreed that the DP slot really plays a key role insofar as, strengthening and enhancing devolution. What are some of these gaps that, regardless of whoever, is given this position, what are some of these gaps that we must, in terms of posterity, fill as a deputy president to be able to strengthen devolution? Because even if you say that the DP has a budget, the DP, stands tall at IBEC, etc., but given the context of President William Ruto, we still see a lot of the files going back to State House for his take and for his green light. What are some of these gaps, Mheshimiwa, that we really must focus on?
One of the gaps I would feel is that the last time the president was the deputy president, is one person who understood the place and the position of deputy presidency vis-a-vis devolution. When I was a speaker, the deputy president was very critical in dictating and making it possible for county governments to function. If you look at, if I'm to look for the last 15 years now, because we are now into we are now almost doing the 20 years of devolution, I can say without a doubt, across the three deputy presidents, I feel that William Ruto, maybe it's because of his political acumen, he understood the value and the power of being a deputy president in charge of IBEC and in charge of devolution. I feel then that subsequently the other deputy presidents have not. Rigathi never settled and never took charge of that position, being the prefect of the county governments on behalf of the national government. Kithure Kindiki, of course, has come in at a time when there's hate and politics of coalition and all that. And you can see his focus is more national than at the county level. The gap for me is simple. There are two positions I feel can do well. One, you talk about being the chair of IBEC, which is economic and financial in nature, very critical, very powerful. It can go a long way, if you ask me, if a deputy president becomes the nexus, becomes the reference point between the county governments and national government. He can be the person who whips the IGTRC under his command, the legislative side, Senate and the National Assembly under his side, because you are the tool of the budget, IBEC, becomes the focal point that, these fights we have at the moment between the Senate and the Council of Governors. The deputy presidency would be the arbiter, would be the one to say, gentlemen, this is my space and we are fighting for resources and responsibilities and issues of governance. Let us bring it to a close because I'm in charge. Lastly, there is one entity that has been lost for the last 15-20 years, the summit. Because the summit is chaired by the president and the governors. I honestly think a very strategic deputy president with an eye on devolution would actually take that responsibility from the president and say, yes, I know you, chair, but because of the demanding nature of the national agendas and policies, let me sit in on your behalf. And nothing stops the president from delegating to the deputy president to sit in the summit, which then brings all governors under his. Because IBEC is a bit bigger. You have the CC's finance who sit, you have the county assembly representation, you have IGTRC and the rest. And it is more technical. But the political one is the summit. So if you could imagine the deputy president takes charge of IBEC as he is the chair and then relieves that pressure from the president and tells the governors, now politically speaking, where we can be able to negotiate hard, strong aspects that can strengthen devolution is at the summit, I will be sitting in on behalf of the president. And that is where they can even make it easier to negotiate and have a very seamless relationship with the legislature. Because if you talk about budget, you cannot talk about budget without the place of the National Assembly and the Senate. Correct. So I feel that is a gap that a deputy president, in fact, it answers your question. How can you strengthen the position now that the Constitution provides for this independence, it provides a budget? For me, politically speaking, I wish he would be the person who connects national and county, so that anything touching on devolution, the president even should not be talking. He should be referring and say, my deputy president, where are we? How far are we? So that the president would only be making proclamation, but the work and the interactions and everything be done by the deputy president. So it can go a long way.
In the strategy, in the game plan for 2027, and even probably learning certain lessons from the past, are these kind of progressive thoughts part of the discussions that happen? Because from what we are seeing, based on the foundation that has been set by Dennis, is that a lot of it is the politics. Who brings in numbers, who brings in the regions, and that is largely what we're even hearing from ODM and the zoning, ODM, UDA, BBG, around the zoning. We are not hearing them saying, we want somebody who has been a governor, who understands the gaps in devolution, who will be able to do this, sit in the summit, is about how many baskets.
We want power.
Yeah, we want power, but power for what, to do what? So in terms of the strategy, the game plan, do you think that these are some of the conversations that either happen or need to happen in terms of who becomes or who is poised to be the deputy president of Kenya?
I don't think so, in the sense that at the moment the conversation is around personalities in a small way. Number two, the president has completely hogged the space when it comes to policy, when it comes to agenda. Give it to him. He succeeded to be the monopoly voice when it comes to the agenda. I'm unable to see any other counter conversation around this. The things like, for example, if I say strategically, how a deputy president can position himself within the context of devolution. The president is the right front center of the agendas and conversations around it. As we go to the 2027 election, you've even seen the contest. The president has reduced the contest into a battle of ideas. He said, when we came into 2022, we said, never again will we have a politics of personalities. We'll have politics of agendas and issues and more or less policies that can change the life of our people. So the president has succeeded to monopolize that conversation to the point it is him versus the opposition, where he says, what agenda do they have? Can they share to Kenyans what they can do? So that below him, no other person is able to chart something new, different from the messaging that the president has monopolized and took charge of. Number two, the power thing, here kusema tunataka power, the challenge is one. You have half the governors not coming back because they have done their second term.
Yes.
So there's a desperation on their part. The Waigurus and the rest are already trying to angle themselves to fit somewhere.
Yes.
The deputy party leader for ODM, Jir, Governor Wajir, has done his 2 terms.
Yes.
Up to 13 or 14 of them have actually finished their term. So they are more or less vulnerable and desperate. Those are my words I use, vulnerable and desperate. That it robs them the clout and ability to say, these are the considerations. So they are more at the begging phase of, let me try to be relevant. Let me try to come up with a political agenda that more or less like brands me as some value to the president. And because you have this powerful president who has already bolted out and won the space with issues to do with agenda, because the president has owned that space single-handedly. He's the one who speaks about specific tasks and issues. Have you even seen his cabinet ministers are struggling? I actually feel the president has been left alone to sell agenda.
But is it because he is struggling with communication? Like he already told us, I think 3 or 4 times in the past, the president said, if I know more than you do in your docket, if I'm the one communicating, then there's a problem. And did they get the wrong people into the office, or is it not... I think a question of appointment.
It's not even a question of appointment, or he got I still go back to the fact that it appears as if the president appoints people who are not fit to be in those positions so that he can take control of the conversations in those spaces, you know? Because, you know, here we are talking about the decision to settle on Rigathi Gachagua in 22, right? Yeah. And he settled on Rigathi Gachagua because ODM had selected Martha Karua, and as much as members of parliament, right, within the party had settled for Rigathi Gachagua, the Karua factor made it difficult for him. You know what I mean? So he had to settle for Rigathi Gachagua, not because he wanted him, but because of the game, the cards that are being played by the opposition. So here we are then, the president even getting rid of Gachagua is because he was a serious cog in the entire matrix. So here we are then talking about the 2027 matrix with regard to deputy president position that you're talking about. And here we are now, whether we like it or not, the president today says and acknowledges the fact that broad-based government and Raila Odinga coming into the picture made it easy for him to run government because of what had happened, you know, because Rigathi Gachagua had left. It was difficult for the president to run things. ODM is a serious contender in saying, hey, boss, we made it easy for you to complete your term because it was very difficult. Therefore, with our numbers and where we're headed in 2027, we deserve that space. But remember, right now, as we're having this discussion, we go back to the Mount Kenya East idea, where Kithure Kindiki comes from the cousins who one would say do not have control of the larger Mount Kenya, do not have the votes from the Mount Kenya. So how difficult is it for whichever side you want to look at, whether it is UDA, a broad-based government, or you want to look at united opposition and the position of deputy president? How serious is it, or just how difficult is it for that decision to be made, whether it is to give it to ODM, who say we have numbers, or whether it is united opposition giving that position to Mount Kenya?
That's a good question. And I'll start by answering what you said. I think when you are good at something, it cannot be used against you. I'll compare it with Obama as a president. Obama was this powerful speaker, and Joe Biden would dwarf in his presence. But he didn't stop Biden staking his claim as a capable deputy president. So I refuse to take that context, and that has always been the accusation, that is the president appointing minions. I don't think so. I just think he's good at his ability to articulate, and super hands-on kind of a person. That was the case even when he was a deputy president. That's why he was almost outshining his boss. So can you use that against him? No. So it's a question of the people he's picked who are equally competent to step up.
But how do you say they're equally competent to step up when the president himself says you guys don't know what it is? But the successes,
the successes of the regime, I don't think it is single-handedly because of the president. It is also because of the team. It is because
I think the challenge is...
That's why I'm saying the challenge would be articulation, yes, but for me, my urge would be, you look at the capacity of your boss, then you step up. You have to step up. I think if the reason I was using Obama is because Biden would pale in comparison. But he still did it well until he became elected as a president. Subsequently, Hillary Clinton, when he was a Secretary of State.
But don't you also think...
So it is your responsibility when you're given a position, whether it's a cabinet minister or a PS, you step up.
I think it's the responsibility of the president to allow those that he has appointed to do their job.
What has he done that stops them from articulating? What stops a PS or a CS to come here? What stops them from going out of their way? That's why I've asked the same question. What was different when he was a deputy president?
They are waiting.
Still the same thing. So can we say that Uhuru let him know? Uhuru was a super hands-on guy. Between the cabinet ministers, how comes it was Matiang'i, the deputy president, William Ruto, that stood out? Not, there are almost 20 cabinet ministers. How many do you remember during the Uhuru years that were strong and very visible? Maybe 2, 3. Same thing applies now. So I feel there's no excuse. It's a question of you stepping up and articulating and owning your space. That is my only two
So in
cents.
other words, what you're saying is that the appointing authority has done the best to pick among equals,
Yes.
but that the equals have a challenge of stepping up. Am I right?
I would just say...
So basically they're incapable. Why have them in
Not
office?
incapable. They are competent, but the gap is a small bit of articulation and being frontal. And you've seen some really trying. Let me give, for example, Duale has really come out strongly blazing when it comes to health. Because health's issue was articulation and following up on issues. So that, for me, has played out. But let me come back to your question you are saying.
Honestly, I don't think Duale should actually feature in this
Listen. No. I'm saying about articulation.
Yeah.
The other ministers are competent. The PSs are competent in their work. Not that it's only that you don't see them. For example, Treasury. You have the former minister Ndungu, the current minister Mbadi, as well as the principal secretary Chris Kiptoo. They have done a fantastic job in Treasury. If you talk about ability that we've had to escape a possible default coming to 2022. But have you ever seen them talking that much? Not really. Actually, it's Mbadi who's come up and brought this much talk and breathe a sense of they can be able to sell. On a good day, Treasury guys are busy at work. In fact, I always say the most harassed officers in government are the Treasury people, because we are bombarded with requests from county governments, from national governments, from sagas, from even the presidency itself, and you have there's no other way, and then you are only reliant on KRA tax and debts. Today, in fact, I remember something, maybe just to remind you. You remember when the president said that, it is always good to see people taking photos when they are meeting, for example, when they go to China. You say, when you are having the conversation, it's very nice to take photos and to appear very cordial. You say, once the photos are out, now the demands from your creditor are nasty. Who are the people who handle that? It's the same Treasury people. IMF, when they show up in town, IMF doesn't come to give you cake and tea. They are showing up to ask answers and say you are defaulting. And for the last 4 years, we've had 2 or 3 IMF programs that have been...
Wakili, that's a very... I like the way you're able to, bring out that positive aspect from Treasury. But look at how Kenyans engage with the Treasury compared to health, compared to water, compared to agriculture. It's very hard to see that positivity in the things that matter to Kenyans, because Treasury, of course, is very important because you really are the bearers of the budget across board. But Kenyans interact very closely with the Treasury only during the finance bill, the budget process. But where things really matter, you walk into a health facility. As much as you're saying Duale is doing very okay, but Kenyans have serious challenges with the SHA. Look at fuel. Today we are talking about cost of oil and prices. And this is things that really matter to Kenyans. I know that we are flipping this from the DP to now the
Because I wanted to answer.
But it's important that we go that way.
Yes, please go.
Maybe if I quickly answer that, I don't envy the position of the president when it comes to the issue of deputy presidency. It's very difficult. You are caught between a rock and a hard place. You would want to placate the ODM side of the divide. Of course, my only challenge to that the ODM of Raila is not the current ODM. ODM, our politics is still personality based. Even UDA by far and large is because of the president. In a big way, you still have to give that credit. Same with ODM was Raila, Uhuru was Jubilee, DCP is Rigathi. If one walks out from the party becomes a shell. So that's a reality. So I understand his careful balance of not seeking to completely dismiss ODM, but at the same time also be realistic with the fact. Let me give you the danger here. If you completely take out the deputy presidency position from on Kenya, you know what that does? You've given ammunition to Rigathi.
Okay.
Absolutely. They'll say, look, this is exactly what I've been telling you for 2 years. And that we've been... in fact, he said we delivered 43% of the vote. Yeah. So we've been taken... Our position has been taken. In fact, he said, I kept saying these ones are Gakunias. Sasa, look, they have become traitors, then they have been lost.
And if you take it away from what one would say, that shell of ODM, right? They would equally say, this is what we wanted. We are here. We helped to run the government. If we do not get it, we're equally out and we would go to competitors.
And that's why I've said it's between a rock and a hard place. Except for me, there's always a silver lining.
Which is?
Look at the most potent issue the ODM Linda Ground are grappling with. Top of the agenda is not the deputy presidency, it's zoning. Because that speaks to their individual interest.
Yeah,
This is now where it matters for them. Gladys Wanga is seeking to be re-elected as a governor. Peter Kaluma seeks to be elected as an MP. Those are ODM strongholds. That is where they have always known. It has always been known since 2007 that you get ODM ticket, you are as good as elected, right? For me, that is more personal to them than the deputy presidency. That I strongly feel their push for deputy presidency is posturing, but the main card they are holding is, okay, fine. If you are to let go of this deputy presidency, which we deserve because we have 40% or 50% of the coalition with UDA, then okay, non-negotiable, give us zoning in Luo Nyanza. That's what I feel they are pushing for. I actually think the push from the ODM Linda Ground is mostly towards zoning rather than the deputy presidency. It's a negotiating tactic. If I came and said I ceded, what are you ceding? So UDA will say, okay, fine, we are ceding this. So UDA will also, and UDA has been doing a lot in Luo Nyanza through the principal secretary, Raymond Omolo, Akina Evans Kidero. They are now coming back. How again do you balance with them? How do you tell them that the work you've been doing 3-4 years, no? This is out of bounds. We've already let it go for the others. That's why I say I don't envy the position of the president. But the beauty, the president thrives in that space. If you look at his style in 2022, look at the competing side, because these were the two giants of politics, Raila Odinga and Ruto. Raila Odinga decided to forestall such fights by actually appointing names to future cabinet positions, where he said Peter Munya would be agriculture, Oparanya would be finance. Why was he doing that? It was to ring-fence these individual personalities. William Ruto did the opposite. He decided to open, in fact, the danger with the Raila style was there was no more new promise to give. It was already known so-and-so will be minister, so-and-so will be minister. So the doors were closed. What did William Ruto do in the opposite? He opened the doors and the windows. Whoever was hanging, he was picking. Let me ask you, what was the value of Alfred Mutua? Still picked him. What was the value of JB Muturi?
He was a party leader.
Mount Kenya was already in. But JB Muturi was told, you're in. And he gave everyone, up to Amason Jeffa Kingi. Kilifi was a stronghold of ODM, and Baba was still there, and they actually still swept. ODM swept everything, almost everything.
And Amason was
but
also a party leader.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. The style then for William Ruto then in 22 was, I don't discriminate, I don't care. You may say you are not having clout. For example, Ukambani was mostly Azimio, yes, but Alfred being a party leader, I'll still pick. And he kept his word by giving them position. So I feel he will have to use the same wisdom now that he's caught between a rock and a hard place. So on one side, he has to balance the Mount Kenya interest, Mount Kenya East, Mount Kenya combined, because within Mount Kenya fight between the so-called Central versus East, and then again, you have within the broad-based, within, and this is not the end. Because the more we go to the election, I kid you not, coalition will have to expand. It is like, I've just used a simple analogy. This is like a polygamous union. Now, the father of the house has to keep referring to the older wives that, look, tunaleta mwingine lakini tutasongeana tu, tutatushiana hapa.
Wakili, I want to look at, as we move towards 2027, we have to look at the new kid on the block.
Yes.
And we have to look at the young vote.
Absolutely.
And we have to look at the numbers that do exist. And right now, everyone wants to jump on a Tuko Kadi. They've been told to stay away, but everyone is jumping on a Tuko Kadi, because they recognize the numbers and what that means, especially coming from a point where we look at even broad-based government as formed today. It is formed, one would actually credit it to the Gen Z protest of 2024.
100%.
You know what I mean?
100%.
So as we talk about fine, we will look at who is a cog. We look at the regions and everything. There is equally a constituency that cannot be ignored, and that is the young vote. How does that make it difficult, even if it's for position of deputy president in the 2027 election?
I call it the October surprise. In the sense that it's a wild card hanging here. Our politics kind of shifted in 24. Why? Our politics always have those moments of changeovers. And it has been the case since the 50s, 60s. After World War II, the returnees came and said, wait a minute, we need to get our independence. And that culminated into the fight and clamor for independence. So that you look at the 40s and early 50s was the changeover. Subsequently, post-60s, when it came to the 60s, the fight for opposition started in the late 60s. The KPU led and all the rest. Again, another changeover. In the 70s, with the almost death of certainty death of Jomo Kenyatta, change of the constitution movement, what have you, succession, again another changeover. In the 80s, the President Moi consolidated by instituting Section 2A that made it a one-party state, again another changeover. 90, 91, 92, the most upheaval, which was the clamor for multipartyism, which was more global, again another changeover. You come to 2002, massive, the first time opposition wins, a changeover. 2007 coming forward, coalition politics, changeover. 24 for me was another changeover. Why? For the first time, the young people had an impact. For the first time, the young people had an agenda. And for the first time, they had ability to influence. You know, for a long time, they have always been the energy and the vote. Yeah. Y2K in 92 was to get the young people to give the energy, gunship and everything. But in 2024, they flipped the card. Tuko Kadi is another surprise in the sense that since 24, the rank and file politicians recovered their space quickly, broad-based happened, and there was a sense of certainty and peace that, look, the young people walipiga kelele ikatulia. Then they spring up out of nowhere. Parties are struggling now, whether opposition or government, to ensure they register voters. Then all of a sudden, the young people show up and say Tuko Kadi, and it becomes the mainstay. Yeah. So I feel going to 2027, the young people will be the wild card that you cannot ignore. However, another warning, I'll use Bangladesh. Yeah. When the young people led a revolution, when it came to the voting, the mainstream political parties the BND still won, because beyond the mobilization, how do you leverage it into something? Keep an eye on the likes of Sifunas. Can they tap into this young, emerging energy? And this young emerging energy is not just to vote. Yeah. They are keen to come with agenda. They demand.
And
the president was even forced to come.
DP?
Not at all.
It's possible?
Not.
Okay. I think that's a good place to end it. Yeah, because Joshua Kiptoo, advocate of the High Court, are having discussion on Game Plan 2027, fight for DP slot, and a lot of conversations. It's important to see how this pans out, as well as other lucrative positions that would determine who takes the DP and who takes all the other slots, but keen to see Asante Sana for gracing Kenya's biggest conversation at exactly 8 a.m. Good morning.
Spice up your life. The only way to start your day.
Pastor Sampson and his wife Charity